Shalom, back again with another lesson. And before I begin this lesson, I'd like to begin by giving all honor, glory, and praises to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rechak Kodash. I want to give double honors to my elders and apostles and elder bishops of Great Millstone who rule well, where I've learned this truth from. I want to say peace and salutations to you, Akim, you brothers out there laboring, pushing this word out in all truth and in sincerity, presenting your bodies as a living sacrifice, which is your reasonable service. I want to say shalom to you, Akwath, meaning you Israelite sisters that may be listening, and also to you Israelites that are scattered across the four corners of the earth. You may look like these other nations, but your seed line goes back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, which is the chosen seed line, right? So it's about the seed line and not the color, right? So just get that clear. So in this lesson, we're going to be going into the book of Daniel, the 12th chapter. But before we do that, I just want to explain that the book of Daniel is a very prophetic book, right? So there's a lot of prophecies that are covered in the book of Daniel, right? So to give you an example, like in Daniel chapter 2, you have the scriptures that go into the vision that Nebuchadnezzar had about the statue. And none of his mages or his wise people could explain the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had. When Nebuchadnezzar turned to Daniel and asked Daniel to interpret it, Daniel was able to do so because the Lord gave him the vision of what the dream meant. So Daniel was able to explain it to Nebuchadnezzar and advise him exactly what it meant. And we understand when you read that chapter that it goes into, the different sections of the statue represent the different empires, the different kingdoms that would reign upon the earth, right, until the time of the end. Now, when you jump to Daniel, the 7th chapter, Daniel received another vision and he was able to go a little bit deeper into the meaning of it and how the kingdoms would be run upon the earth and how they would conduct themselves in the earth, right? When you get to the 12th chapter, it speaks more on the final vision that Daniel had, which focuses on the end times, with the lead up to the ultimate deliverance where Yahushua turns up and delivers his people, starting with the people that have died in Yahushua. They get raised up first, and then the ones that remain on the earth that are part of the elect, they'll be called up afterwards, right? So before we actually get into the book of Daniel, I'm going to start in the book of Revelation. And I'm going to go to the 12th chapter. Right? So this is Revelation chapter 12, verse 12. And it reads, "Therefore rejoice ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth that he have but a short time." So with this scripture, we understand that this is referring to the nation of Esau Edom, because they'll be the ones that are ruling at the end, right? When you read, let me just get it for you quick, and I'll come back to that. So when you read in the book of 2nd Esdras, chapter 6, and I believe it's verse, we go straight to verse 9, straight to the point. This is 2nd Esdras chapter 6, verse 9. It says, "For Esau is the end of the world, and Jacob is the beginning of it that followeth," meaning that Esau will be ruling in the society. He'll be ruling, and then once he's taken out, then Jacob is the beginning of it that followeth. The righteous seed line is going to be ruling in that time. Yeah. So back to Revelation chapter 12, verse 12. And it reads, "Therefore rejoice ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time." That's why you're witnessing now the fall of this kingdom. This society is falling because they understand that their time is almost up. So they want to go out with that final hurrah, that final bang, to try and offset the prophecy. But there's nothing they're going to be able to do to stop that, right? So it says, "Woe to the inhabitants of the earth," meaning destruction to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time. So we're going to jump over to the book of Jeremiah. Jeremiah chapter 30. And I'm going to read in verse 7, right? So it says, alas, for that day is great, so that none is like it. It is even the time of Jacob's trouble, but he shall be saved out of it. Right? So it's saying, alas, for that day is great, that day of trouble, which is getting ready to happen. We're starting to see the beginning signs of it, with all these uproars of the people and everything, we're seeing in the news with ICE, with the police force and the civil war that's getting ready to be unleashed upon the world. Says, alas, for that day is great, so that none is like it. So it's going to be a day like a time period like no other. It said, is even the time of Jacob's trouble, but he shall be saved out of it. So Jacob's trouble is the time period that we're getting into, the day of destruction, uproars of the people, civil wars, race wars, class wars. All these things are getting ready to happen in the earth, right? And it says, but he shall be saved out of it. And the he that is referring to there is the elect, the remnant, the ones that are predestined to make it to be delivered in the end, right? And that's who the he is referring to, the elect. So, with that being said, we're going to get into the book of Daniel, the 12th chapter, and we're going to touch on the prophecies of that chapter, right? So this is Daniel, chapter 12, and we're going to go from the top, and it reads, and at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince, which standeth for the children of thy people, and there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book. Right? So there you have it. You see how it says, and at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people. So it's going to be so bad out here when it all kicks off and you get into the full swing of, Jacob's trouble. It's going to be so bad that Michael, the archangel, is going to have to stand up for the children of thy people. And the children of thy people are the Israelites, well, the elect of Israel, right? And as we continue reading, it says, and there shall be a time of trouble, which is talking about Jacob's trouble. It says, and there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. It says, and at that time, thy people, which are the elect of Israel, says, and at that time, thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book. And that's talking about the elect, the remnant. They're going to be, delivered. They're not going to go without, going through their trials during that time of trouble. They're going to go through their trials, right? The Lord's going to test them, see what they're about, see if they, are true to, what they believe, They say, oh yeah, I'd never turn on the Lord. Well, the Lord's going to test you. The Lord's going to put you through that time of trouble to see if you stay 10 toes down or if you fold, right? So that's why it says, and at that time thy people, the elect, shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book. So with that, we're going to bring out a few precepts, right? So in the book of Job, right, we're going to go to chapter 5, and we're going to go to chapter or verse 19, right? So it says here, he shall deliver thee in 6 troubles, yea, in 7 there shall no evil touch thee. Right, so you're going to make it through. You're going to go through your trials. You're going to be, it says, he shall deliver thee in 6 troubles. Yeah, in 7 there shall no evil touch thee. So the elect are going to go through their trials, and they're going to be tested, but ultimately no evil shall touch thee. Right, so they're going to make it through. The Lord's going to be looking after them, taking care of them, guiding their steps, getting them through the process. But you have to believe and you have to have faith in the Lord that he's going to deliver you in those times. Now, as we continue in verse 20, it says, in famine he shall redeem thee from death, and in war from the power of the sword. So during that time of Jacob's trouble, there will be famines, right? It says in the book of Matthew, let me just quickly go there and I'll come back. Matthew, the 24th chapter. This is what it says. It says, I'll start verse 6. It says, and ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. Right? It's called, sort of like a heads up, like, look, everything that we're seeing taking place in the earth, all these rumors of wars, these wars that are taking place, all this is supposed to happen. But it says, see that you be not troubled. Like, don't trouble yourself with these things because it's supposed to happen. As we continue reading in verse 7, it says, for nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines. So you see there? And there shall be famines, and pestilences, and earthquakes in diverse places. Verse 8 says, all these are the beginning of sorrows. So this is what we're coming into now, the time period that we're seeing unfolding in the earth. So when we go back to the book of Job, chapter 5, we go to verse 20 again. See, it says, in famine he shall redeem thee from death. So the Lord's going to be looking after you. So during the time of famine, the Lord's going to watch over his servants. You can read that in the book of Isaiah, the 65th chapter, right? How his servants shall eat, but the rest shall be hungry, right? It says, and in war from the power of the sword. So the Lord's going to be protecting us, protecting his elect. Lord willing, we are of that number. So another precept, matter of fact, let me go to the book of Isaiah, because I did bring that up, right? So this is the book of Isaiah, chapter 65, and we're going to read from verse 11. It says, but ye are they that forsake the Lord Yahweh, that forget my holy mountain, that prepare a table for that troop, and furnish the drink offering unto that number. So in regards to when it's talking about these are they that forsake the Lord Yahweh, you have a bunch of wicked Israelites around that time, right? So the Lord is comparing them to like a cluster of bad grapes. But when we read up, so when we go to verse 8, I'll just go back there, right? It says, thus saith the Lord Yahweh, as the new wine is found in the cluster, and one saith, destroy it not, for a blessed is in it. So so will I do for my servant's sake, that I may not destroy them all. So, with that bad cluster of grapes, you would think, oh, they're a bad, cluster of grapes, destroy it all, get rid of it all. But what it's saying here is that as the new wine is found in the cluster, it says, don't destroy it all, because you may be destroying some of the good grapes, some of the good servants, right? So to go back to verse 11, it says, but ye are they that forsake the Lord Yahweh, that forget my holy mountain, that prepare a table for that troop. So the Lord is talking about the bad cluster of grapes, right? So he's saying, but ye are they that forsake the Lord Yahweh. And that's talking about the bad cluster of grapes, because they were doing all kind of idolatry, they were doing wickedness, they were murdering, they were doing all kinds of things, right? It says that forget my holy mountain, and they were forgetting the Lord's ordinances. They weren't keeping the commandments. They were doing whatever they wanted to do. They were worshiping idols, right? And it says that prepare a table for that troop. They were making offerings to these Babylonian deities, these false idols, these false gods, right? It says, and that furnish the drink offering unto that number, which shows you why the Lord is getting ready to punish the bad cluster of grapes, the bad Israelites, the wicked Israelites, right? So as we continue reading, it says, therefore will I number you to the sword, and ye shall all bow down to the slaughter, because when I called, ye did not answer. When I spake, ye did not hear, but did evil before mine eyes, and did choose that wherein I delighted not. Now they chose to, instead of listening to the Lord and following his ordinances like the good cluster of grapes, they wanted to do their own thing, right? So the Lord is basically saying here that you will all be judged by the sword, because they chose to do wickedness instead of listen to the Lord, right? So as we continue on in verse 13, it says, therefore, thus saith the Lord, Yahweh Bahashim Yahweh Shai, behold, my servants shall eat. And there you have it. The Lord's servants is a good cluster of grapes, the ones that did listen to the ordinances and followed after the Lord and studied and had faith in the Lord and believed in the Lord. It says, my servants shall eat, but ye shall be hungry. So that wicked seed, the wicked cluster of grapes, they're going to be hungry in that time when the famine comes. It says, behold, my servants shall drink, but ye shall be thirsty. Behold, my servants shall rejoice, but ye shall be ashamed. You're going to be kicking yourself right? Because the Lord is saying that he will protect you in the time of trouble. But obviously, just like when you read in the book of Judges, the Israelites were constantly going off, worshipping idols, following after the heathen, getting judged for it, calling out to the Lord to deliver them, which the Lord had mercy upon the Israelites, brought them out of their captivity and the places where he scattered them, only for them to immediately go back and do the exact same thing again. It was constant. That's what the Lord had to suffer. So the Lord's like, look, I'm done with these people, man. I'm done with these Israelites. I'm going to destroy them. But I'm not going to destroy the ones, the good grapes, the good cluster of grapes. I'm only going to destroy the wicked. That's the 2/3. Right? And the other nations. It says, behold, this is verse 14. It says, behold, my servants shall sing for joy of heart, but ye shall cry for sorrow of heart, and shall howl for vexation of spirit. Because you're going to be, going through a bad time, a rough time, because that time of trouble is coming. Right? Another precept you can find in the book of Proverbs. Proverbs chapter 15. And I'll start from the top, right? So it says this is Proverbs 15:1. It says, a soft answer turneth away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger, right? So, you can use that to apply that to your daily life, right? For example, if you walking down the street and then, you bump somebody, you could say, sorry, that was my fault. I apologize, etc., and keep it moving. Other times when somebody bumps you or they step on your shoes, you want to argue with them and you want to fight, and they get into grievous words, and that anger can escalate into something serious, right? Pulling out a gun or a knife and stabbing, you know what I mean? It's so many things that can happen by escalating. You see that when you have these people that are emotional. They get emotional and then they start, getting animated, and all of a sudden it goes from a bad situation to a worse situation. That's why it says here, the book of Proverbs has a lot of wisdom. It says, a soft answer turneth away wrath. Just, hey, my fault. All right, you got it. I'll continue on my way. You got it, whatever, It says, a soft answer turneth away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger. So you're getting emotional, can't hold your spirit, and before you know it, now you're in a sticky situation. Verse 2, it says, the tongue of the wise useth knowledge aright. It says, but the mouth of fools poureth out foolishness, right? So the tongue of a wise useth knowledge, right? So you have to use knowledge in these times that we're coming into, especially the time of Jacob's trouble. It may not be wise to speak foolishly in a bad situation, because we understand it's going to be a time like no other. Before you know it, you'll be getting abducted and tied up in somebody's basement. You know what I mean? Like, when you speak with wisdom, speak with knowledge and understanding, you'll be all right. But the point is in verse 3, right? So this is Proverbs chapter 15, verse 3. It said, the eyes of the Lord Yahweh are in every place, beholding the evil and the good. So the Lord sees the good. He saw the good cluster of grapes, and he's seeing the wicked, the bad grapes, the bad cluster of grapes, right? So the Lord is seeing everything. The Lord understands exactly what's happening, right? He's always aware of what's going on, right? But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the book of Daniel. Go back to the book of Daniel, the 12th chapter. We'll continue on. So this is Daniel chapter 12. I'll read verse 1 again. It says, and at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people. And there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book. That's referring to the elect. Right, so this is verse 2. It says, and many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. So those that died in Yahushua, believing in Yahushua, following the ways, keeping the commandments to the best of their ability, they shall awake to everlasting life, meaning when Yahushua returns, they'll get beamed up first, right? Then the elect the remnant that are left behind will be beamed up afterwards. But the 2/3, the ones that are left behind, they're going to die on this side, right? And they're going to be born again through the loins of the elect in the kingdom, but they're going to wake up to everlasting contempt and everlasting shame, because they're going to understand exactly what they've done on this side and how they conducted themselves and how they were wicked and went against the Lord's ways. You know what I mean? So, there's a precept that I want to get in the book of First Thessalonians. In First Thessalonians chapter 4, we're going to jump to the 16th verse, right? So it says, for the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trump of the Most High, and the dead in Yahushai HaMashiach shall rise first. So there you have it. You see how the dead that are in Yahushai will be raised up first. Then you have the 17th verse. It says, Then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Lord. So, the ones that remain, the elect that are the good cluster of grapes on this side that remain, will be called up with the ones that were dead in Yahushai, be called up together with them, and will be ever with the Lord, right? So that's where, the kingdom starts and will be changed in the twinkling of an eye, right? As we continue in verse 18, it says, Wherefore comfort one another with these words. So therefore, we're going to go back to the book of Daniel, the 12th chapter. We're going to go to the 3rd verse. It says, And they that be wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament, and they that turn many to righteousness as the stars forever and ever. And those that be wise, that's talking about the elect, the 144,000 that turn many to righteousness, right? Because they're out there on our highways and hedges trying to compel our people to come back to the Lord and repent and follow his ways and trust in the Lord, believe in the Lord, have faith in the Lord. These are, this is talking about the elect, the 144,000, which will be the ruling class in the kingdom of heaven under Yahushai, right? So now we get to the verse 4. This is now switching the time period. The time period that is talking about in this scripture is talking about today's time, today's age, right? So I'm going to read verse 4. It says, But thou, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book even to the time of the end. It says, Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased, right? So when it's talking about, this age, it's talking about like today's time, today's the modern societies where this is sort of talking about. Now, where it says many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased, for Daniel, in Daniel's time, for him to walk from one city to the next, it could have taken him days, weeks to get from one city to the next. Whereas, with the introduction of technology and how technology's improved, you went from walking everywhere to now being able to take horse and buggy, right, or horse and carriage. Then it increased, the technology increased, so now you can drive an automobile. So now for you to drive from one city to the next, just a few hours, And then with the technology increasing even further to now they have airlines, you can fly from one country to the next in a day. And then obviously you see, like, finally how you got the technology increasing. You now have the mobile phone technology, computers, right? So you can do a live and somebody in Japan watching you live just by you clicking the button, so they get the word. So that's where the knowledge shall be increased. See, as we continue on, right? So verse 5, it says, Then I, Daniel, looked, and behold, there stood other two, the one on this side of the bank of the river, and the other on that side of the bank of the river, right? And that's talking about the angels, right? Verse 6 says, And the one said to the man clothed in linen, and that man clothed in linen is Yahushai, says, which was upon the waters of the river, How long shall it be to the end of these wonders? right? And you can read this account in the book of Daniel chapter 10 and also in the book of Daniel chapter 11. It talks about, this account. So now when we get to verse 7, this again switches the time period. So now it's going to go into the time period of slavery. You see? So that's why I say in the book of Daniel, the 12th chapter, you have to understand the time period, because it will get confusing if you don't understand that there's different time periods that it's referring to, right? So this time period again is the time period of slavery, right? So as we read on, it says, "And I heard a man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, when he held up his right hand and his left hand unto heaven, and swear by him that liveth forever, that it shall be for a time, times, and an half. And when he shall have accomplished to scatter the people of the holy people, all these things shall be finished." Right. So when we go into that, it says a time, times, and a half. That's referring to 350 years. That's the time that you had the transatlantic slave trade, started from 1619, and then ending chattel slavery in 1865, which, if you take into consideration Jim Crow, all these black codes and all this other thing, that's another 100 years. So between 1619 to 1965, that's about 350 years, 346 years, something around that number, right? And around 1969 is when the Israelites started waking up to who they were. They were starting to learn, the truth, right? So you had, Jim Crow, you had segregation, you had so-called blacks being denied basic civil rights, so that's about that time. So to break down the numbers, where it says a time, that's equal to 100 years. Times is equal to 200 years, because it's plural, so 200 years. Then you have an and a half, which is 50, right? And that's where you get the 350 years, which is when the so-called blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans went into hardcore slavery, right? It says then after this time is when all things shall be finished, which you can read that in the book of Daniel chapter 7. I'm not going to go there, but that's where you can read of that history, right? So in verse 8, it says, "And I heard, but I understood not. Then said I, O Lord, what shall be the end of these things?" So now Daniel heard the Lord, but didn't understand what it was talking about. He didn't understand it. And like I mentioned, there was a time that the books were closed. We read back in verse 4, right? It says, but thou, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book even to the time of the end, because it wasn't for Daniel to understand at that point, because this is a future event, right? Now, as we go to back to verse 8, it says, here it shows you, "And I heard," Daniel saying, "and I heard, but I understood not. Then said I, O Lord, O my Lord, what shall be the end of these things?" So Daniel's inquiring about what shall be the end of these things. So Daniel wants to understand what's going on. He wants the angels to explain. So we go into verse 9. It says, "And he said, Go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up, sealed, till the time of the end." Right? So the words were closed up and sealed to the last days, right? This is the time period that it's going into now, you see? So the time period, again, has just jumped from the time of slavery to the end of days, which is where we're at now. So the time period of the last days. So Daniel heard the prophecy, but he didn't understand it. And that's because it wasn't for Daniel to understand that time period, right? Right? Now, we understand that we're in the last days because I got a precept here in the book of Habakkuk, chapter 2, and I'll just go straight to the point in verse 3. It says, "For the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it shall speak and not lie. Though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come. It will not tarry." Meaning the vision is set for a specific time, right? The prophecies that's getting ready to take place is set for a specific time, like the time of Jacob's trouble, the time that the devil shall come down having great wrath because he have but a short time. These are set for a specific time. It says, "But at the end it shall speak." And now we're starting to see these events taking place, these prophecies taking place, and they're not lying. They're coming forth, and people can see it with their own two eyes, right? It says, though it tarry, and tarry just means to delay, right? So because it's taken a long time for it to happen, it says wait for it, because it will surely come. It will not tarry. Just because it doesn't happen on your time doesn't mean it's not going to happen. It just means that it's set for an appointed time, and the time wasn't at that time Daniel, for him to understand that, right? And this means, when we're seeing these things, it means that the book is no longer sealed, right? So as we go back to the book of Daniel, chapter 12, and we go into verse 10, it says that many shall be purified and made white and tried, but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand, right? So what it's talking about here, it says many shall be purified and made white. That's talking about the elect, right? And tried, because they're going to be tried. They're going to go through that period, as I mentioned. They're going to go through that time of trouble, Jacob's trouble, and they're going to be put through situations, and they're going to be tried. That's what the Lord is doing to the elect. He's trying them. See if you are about what you say you're about, right? It says, but the wicked shall do wickedly, meaning the bad cluster of grapes, they're going to continue to do wickedly, because that's their lot. That's what they were set up to be, is the wicked, but they're going to continue to be wicked, and they shall do wicked, and none of the wicked shall understand. They won't get the understanding. Why? Because they're wicked. It says, but the wise shall understand. So the good cluster of grapes, the good grapes, the elect, they'll understand, because they've been studying. They've been doing, keeping the ordinances of the Lord to the best of their abilities, right? Now, as we continue in verse 11, again, now we have another shift in the time period. So the time period now is shifting back to 66 AD through 70 AD, right? So it's going back to the time that Jerusalem was taken down. So now in verse 11 it says, and from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days, right? Which is the equivalent of 3.5 years. So from the time of 66 AD to 70 AD, that's about 3.5 years. This is when the Israelites started revolting against the Romans, right? And the reason they were revolting against it is because of the taxation, right? You also had the Sicarii that were, wilding out, the Dagomen, which were attacking, the Romans. So around that time is when Nero, right? And Nero, we believe, is, Donald Trump is the reincarnation of Nero, because they have the same characteristics. So we refer to Nero as Nero 47. This is when Nero sent General Vespasian to squash the revolt. Now we're going to go to the book of Matthew, the 24th chapter, because this is what speaks about this specific time period directly, right? So when we read in the book of Matthew, chapter 24, we go to verse 15, right? And it's red letter, so you see it's Yahushua that's speaking here, right? So verse 15, it says, when ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, which is what we just read in the 11th verse, the 12th chapter and 11th verse, right? It says, when ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place. Whoso readeth, let him understand. So again, now we're talking about, Daniel the prophet. So Daniel the 12th chapter, again, verse 11 goes back to the time period of 70 AD, which is what this scripture is going into. So as we continue on, verse 16, it says, then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains, right? And that's the interiors of Africa that, they're saying when you see the Roman armies compass around Jerusalem, understand that, the destruction is coming, right? So it says, them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. Verse 17, it says, let him which is on the housetop not come down to take anything outside of his house. Verse 18, it says, neither let him which is in the field return back to take his clothes, right? So in other words, like when you see the Roman armies compassing around about Jerusalem, like don't even go back. Like literally just migrate from this point, because it's about to be a very ugly time in history. So when you see these things happening, don't even go back. As we continue in verse 19, it says, "And woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days," right? And it's warning the people that have children, small children. It says, "Woe unto you," meaning destruction, because it's going to be a really harsh and heavy judgment that's getting ready to come pass around, about Jerusalem. Verse 20 it says, "But pray ye that your flight be not in winter, neither on the Sabbath day." Verse 21 it says, "For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be." Right? So the time that you're getting ready to experience, to witness, is going to be a time like no other. Nothing that's ever happened on the earth before. You're going to see the complete destruction of Jerusalem. It says this also in the book of Luke, so we're going to turn there also. So this is Luke chapter 21, and we're going to start at verse 20. Again, it's the same warning. So Luke chapter 21 verse 20, and it says, "And when ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh." So Yahushua is giving them the heads up, like, look, when you see the Roman armies surrounding the city, understand that the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple is getting ready to be a time like no other. It's going to be bad. That's why when we read in Matthew, it's saying, don't come down from your housetop, don't even come in from the field to grab your clothes. Just like literally just keep it moving, like flee into the mountains. You see? So it's saying here, it says, "When ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh," meaning it's near. It's near to the time when that destruction comes. Verse 21 says, "Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out, and let not them that are in the countries enter thereinto." So don't go back. Like, don't go back to Jerusalem, because it's about to be completely overrun and destroyed. You see? So verse 22, it says, "For these be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled." And the angel was explaining to Daniel about this time period, and Daniel's seeing it. He's writing it down. That's why it was written, that these things may be fulfilled. Verse 23, it goes again. It says, "But woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days, for there shall be great distress in the land, and wrath upon this people." Continue on in verse 24, it says, "And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled." Now, when we read in the book of Deuteronomy, there was a lot of wicked stuff that was happening during that time period. Right? When we look at the curses in the book of Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter, we get to verse 54, right? And this is a very popular scripture that a lot of Israelites use to, convince, the elect or the Israelites that, they are the Israelites, because of the curses. But this one here specifically is referring to time of 70 AD, right? So it reads, this is Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 54, "So that the man that is tender among you and very delicate, his eyes shall be evil towards his brother, and towards the wife of his bosom, and towards the remnant of his children, which he shall leave." So read on. It says, "So that he will not give to any of them of the flesh of his children, whom he shall eat." So during the time of the Roman persecution, 70 AD, the Israelites were starving, right? Because the Romans surrounded Jerusalem and cut off the supply lines, right? So they had food storage within the city walls, but because of infighting, the eye being evil towards the brother, you had certain sects like the Sicarii fighting other sects, and they just ended up destroying all the storage, which ended up to there being a famine in the city because they were trying to hold out against the Romans, and all the Romans did was just wait outside for them, right? So you had people starving to death, So you had children starving to death, and then you had people eating their children, like it says here, so that he will not give to any of them of the flesh of his children whom he shall eat, because he hath nothing left him in the siege and in the straitness wherewith thine enemies shall distress thee in all thy gates. See, so the Romans, they did a number on the city of Jerusalem, on the siege of Jerusalem, right? And the same with the women. It says the tender, verse 56. It says the tender and delicate woman among you, which would not adventure to set the sole of her foot upon the ground for delicateness and tenderness, her eyes shall be evil towards the husband of her bosom, and towards her son, and towards her daughter. Verse 57, it says, and towards her young one that cometh out from between her feet, and towards her children which she shall bear, for she shall eat them, for want of all things, secretly in the siege and straitness wherewith thine enemies shall distress thee in thy gates. You see? So this is talking about the time of the siege of Jerusalem during 66 AD and 70 AD. You see? So when we go back to the book of Daniel, 12th chapter, right, we're going to read in verse 11 again. It says, and from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days, 3.5 years. So from 66 AD to 70 AD. See? Now when we get to verse 12, it says, blessed is he that waiteth and cometh to the 1,305 and 30 days. So 1,335 days, that's another 3.5 years. See? So it's saying, blessed is he that waiteth, right? And why he's saying, blessed is he that waiteth, is because of the horrific time that they would have to endure during that time period, right? Now, the 1,335 days, that's 3.5 years in total. That gives you 7 years, right? So you have from 66 AD all the way up to 73 AD. That's the time frame that it's referring to here in the book of Daniel, the 12th chapter and the 12th verse. Now, just quickly, right, just to look up the revolt, we have here the Great Jewish Revolt. Right, so this is the siege of Jerusalem. I'll just quickly read a brief bit of history here. So this is where the Romans breached the walls and they burnt down the temple, and there was great atrocities and many people died in that siege. You see the illustration. But this is what the article says. It says the siege of Jerusalem in 70 CE was the decisive event of the first Jewish revolt against the Roman Empire, right? So you see how it's got the time frame, the 7 years. This from 66 AD to 73 AD, but CE, it says here. It says Roman forces led by Titus besieged the Jewish capital, the revolt's main stronghold. It says after months of fighting, they breached the defenses, destroyed the second temple, and razed the city, killing, enslaving, and displacing much of its population. It says the city's fall marked the effective end of the revolt and had far-reaching political, religious, and cultural consequences. So it says in the winter of 69 and 70 CE, after the secession war in Rome, Titus led at least 48,000 troops, including 4 legions and auxiliary forces, back into Judea. By the spring, this army had encircled Jerusalem, the population of which had surged refugees and Passover pilgrims. Inside the city, rival factions, led by John, Gishala, Simon, and Eleazar, fought each other, destroying the city's food supplies. As I mentioned before, they were in there fighting each other. And I got another article I want to show you after this, after reading this part. It says they fought each other, destroying the city's food supplies and weakening its defenses. Although they eventually united and mounted fierce resistance, Roman forces breached the city walls and drove their defense back into the temple precincts. It says in the summer months, July and August, says the Romans captured the Temple Mount and destroyed the second temple, right? And this is an event that's commemorated annually, right, in Judaism. So I wanted to show you this as well. This is the book titled From Babylon to Timbuktu. It talks about this time period, right? And this is by Rudolph R. Windsor, right? So on page 84, which is just over here, right, so on page 84, it gives you a little a description of that time period, right? So it says in the year 65 BC, the Roman armies under General Pompey captured Jerusalem. In 70 AD, General Vespasian and his son Titus put an end to the Jewish state with great slaughter, right? And this is that siege of Jerusalem that we just read about. It says, during the period of the military governors of Palestine, many outrages and atrocities were committed against the residue of the people. It says, during the period from Pompey to Julius, it has been estimated that over 1 million Jews fled into Africa, fleeing from Roman persecution and slavery. The slave markets were full of black Jewish slaves, you see. So you understand that, you had 1 million Jews fled into Africa, just like it said, when thou shalt see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then flee into the mountains. And this is what this is going into, you see. Right, so we ended up migrating into the interiors of Africa, you see. And that's why we ended up on the west coast. And then from there, we ended up going into the transatlantic slave trade, see. So as we continue, the last verse 13, it says, but go thou thy way till the end be, for thou shalt rest and stand in thy lot at the end of days. So everybody's destined to stand in their lot at the end of days. So the wicked are going to stand in their lot and be wicked in the end of days. Daniel's going to stand in his lot. He's going to be reincarnated to be in his lot at the end of days. So if you're a prophet from the beginning, you'll be a prophet in the end. If you're a wicked from the beginning, you'll be a wicked in the end as well. So you'll all stand in your lot at the time of the end, you see. So if you're a prophet from the beginning, you'll be a prophet in the end. And a scripture that brings that out is in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 1, verse 5. And it reads, before I formed thee in the belly, I knew thee, and before thou camest forth out of the womb, I sanctified thee, and I ordained thee a prophet unto the nations, right? So, if we were prophets in this time, we were prophets in the ancient times as well. We were part of the good grapes, the good cluster, you see. So I pray that this lesson has been edifying through the spirit and power of Yahweh, Bahashem Yahushai. With that, we're going to give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem Yahushai, Bahashem Recha Kodash. Double honors to the elders and apostles and elder bishops of Great Millstone who rule well, who have learned this truth. And peace and salutations to hopeful elect that may be listening. And it's on to the next one, Lord willing. Shalom.